Welcome back to my mini-series interviewing people about how the pandemic has had an effect on the lives of ordinary people. I am Eliziam and welcome to my channel. And I'm joined today by somebody who I can tell you is anything but ordinary. His name is Leonard, and he's going to talk to us about the really important issue of mental health during the pandemic. So a massive welcome to you, Leonard. I'm very, very grateful to have you here.
Thank you, Eliziam. It's a pleasure to be invited by yourself onto this platform. I've watched previous episodes and I think your work is very important to be able to let people express themselves about this truly challenging time for everyone in the world. So I'm really excited to be here. So thank you for having me.
Oh, thanks for saying that. So the idea of this kind of mini-series is to document the experience of the pandemic. And it's also supposed to be a cathartic experience as well, because I think we've all been through a certain amount of trauma, albeit to varying degrees, you know, depending on where you are and how it changed you. But I think we need to talk about it. So yeah, that's really the idea behind it. So the way that I'm kind of trying to run it is just basically inviting my guests to talk about the impact of the pandemic in terms of their personal life and professional life. And it's your choice how much detail you go into, really. So I'm just going to give you free rein and let you tell me.
Fantastic. Well, if I take myself back to the beginning of 2020, we were not expecting to be in this position just over 2 years later. I lost a family member in early 2020, and in February their funeral was during that time. And it was a celebration of this individual's life, and it was quite a good send-off for this individual. And then we got into March, and that's when the media, from a UK standpoint, started to the news started to gather momentum about what was going on in regards to the pandemic. Europe at that time, in particular Italy and other European countries, were a little bit more further ahead and advanced in their stages. And I remember when I was at the gym, I was in the sauna and steam room, and I was speaking to an individual. There's two individuals there, who one was from Italy, had family members over there, and was talking about how, you know, it got to a point where they were running out of places to bury individuals, which was really sad. They started to use other places to do that. And she was quite distraught at the time. And this was a week before the government announced that they would be locking down. Now, prior to that, just to kind of picture a bit further, the government was talking about, you know, just be careful, make sure you wash your hands, you know, kind of taking basic procedures, whilst the rest of Europe was, well, specific parts of Europe was kind of getting to that more panic mode. And I remember speaking to these two individuals. The individual that was from Italy was explaining how things were there. And she said that she could envisage things dramatically changing in the UK. And the other individual I was speaking to was in a position where they lived by themselves. The gym was their life, it was their passion. And all their family members, all the family members of the person lived in Scotland. So she was also in a state of concern, quite anxious about what the immediate future held for this situation. And she said, I don't know what I would do if lockdown came to the UK. And a week later, the announcement was made. I remember it was Monday, I believe. And it was lockdown. Now, the funny thing is, for myself personally, I felt like I could manage. I felt in terms of my family, we adapted to the situation. Myself and my wife, we're key workers. I work as a competency development trainer for a light rail company in London. So I had been working right through the pandemic, and same with my wife as well. So we were in a position where we felt we could adapt. The weather was really nice, which was quite unique at the time. But it was what was going on around me externally that kind of led me to what I wanted to talk to you about today. And it was the way different social groups and different individuals reacted at the beginning, throughout, and up until now, it reacted to the pandemic and the lockdown. So at that point, people were, we didn't really know how long we would be in lockdown. We had no idea. We just thought, okay, this will pass. People were being told to stay at home, only travel if it's necessary. Myself working for a light rail company, it was business as usual, but we had to adapt from institutional perspective in terms of being safe within the company amongst staff and with the passengers that people use the services in that respect. So we were kind of trying to adapt to the situation in that point. And I felt to myself, okay, well, let's see how long this goes on. So I go to the gym quite often. There was no gyms. I'll just go to the park and I'll train at the park, and you'll see other people there. But then it was what was going on outside, which really kind of concerned me. So there was obviously the moral panic that started to generate from the situation. The way people were panicking, buying excess amounts of toilet roll and pasta and all sorts of stuff. It was like doomsday. Everybody was running around, and that was quite weird. And then the schools. And I have children, and two of my children were towards the end of primary school at the time. And literally, they haven't had a year 5 or a year 6.
Oh.
And then there was the homeschooling situation, which was challenging. My wife used to be a teacher, so that kind of helped. And I'm really passionate about education as well. But I think one of your guests, I think it was him, who touched upon having children and then being at home and having to teach and stuff like that. That was something that I felt was challenging for most parents to varying degrees. Some people were not in the position to teach. Some people were in the position they didn't have the resources like laptops, and nowadays it's like Google Classrooms and stuff. And that was quite challenging in terms of that, because every child has different needs. So there was a lot of parents I used to speak to, people, work colleagues, friends who have children, and would talk about their challenges in trying to keep their children attentive, following the work, liaising with the schools. It was really tough. So there was that. Then there was the whole situation with George Floyd, and when that happened, that it reverberated around the world. Mm-hmm. And then it started to open certain situations in the UK. And personally, that was tough. Only for the fact that I think the most challenging thing is that it got to the point that you weren't sure who was racist and who wasn't. Then it became a point where you're speaking to individuals and they'll say things like, all lives matter. And you'd be thinking, well, if all lives mattered, there wouldn't be a Black Lives Matter. And this wasn't a sense of one life matters more than the other. It was a sense of the injustice that has been going on for far too long. And that relating to that was quite challenging as well, because then you're speaking to certain individuals and then like, you know, it's like there was no sense of compassion or empathy, understanding. There was large swaths of ignorance, and it felt like there were certain individuals that were more annoyed about being called a racist than racism itself. So there was, as everyone knows, that was quite a challenging time as well. So that personally was tough. And then obviously there was the aftermath of the whole Brexit that was going on during the time. And then it hit July, and we'd been in lockdown for coming up to like 4 months or something like that. And then restrictions started to lift. And I think by then, the majority of people began to adapt. But there was an element of the voiceless who we weren't hearing about. Like, for example, we were allowed to go out and do exercise, and that's all well and good if you have a garden or a park nearby. But what about individuals that live in high-rise flats? Mm-hmm. And then there was people who had loved ones who had passed away, and that's why I started with my family member who passed away. If that happened a month or two later, no one would have been able to attend the funeral near enough. Mm-hmm. It would have been very, very small gathering. There was individuals who still to this day are still grieving because they weren't able to bury their loved ones. So there was that as well. And then things started to ease slightly, and then people were under the impression that, okay, things might get better. And then the autumn winter hit. And I feel that lockdown was really challenging. There was so many elements to that, because then it became that there was a point of frustration for people. Like, when is this going to end? Mm-hmm. Then the whole conversation around vaccinations began. And then the dichotomy that began to develop from that. You know, are you going to get the vaccine? Aren't you going to get the vaccine? Why not? Everybody challenging everybody. It became very polarizing. And then as time went on through the pandemic, I started to see how it was affecting people's mental health from various points. Like, for example, people who were furloughed. And I would speak to individuals in the area I live in London, and some people were like, I don't know whether I'm going to be able to go back to my job. I have bills to pay. I have a family to look after, mortgages, rent to pay. What am I going to do? I don't know. And then you had other people who felt, well, it's like a kind of long-term holiday without the foresight to look at this as, okay, what happens when this furlough scheme stops? And as we speak, various sectors were affected immensely, like the hospitality sector. And I think that created a sense of strain on people's mental health. So I started to see this around me. I've had colleagues and people that I've known that have had breakdowns, people that have had to leave their jobs due to their mental health, people who've developed mental illness, because I think it's important to really define the difference between mental health and mental illness. Mm-hmm. There's not enough awareness of the difference between the two. And sometimes the lines are blurred due to the assumptions that people made from the past about what mental health actually means. And when you see people going through that, it's very tough. And then you have suicide. There was vast amounts of suicide, in particular amongst males and women between the ages of 16 and 24. And then domestic violence. There were people who were locked down with individuals who found it challenging, and some people would turn to alcohol and substance abuse. And there were people who were dealing with domestic violence throughout lockdown. Mm-hmm. And then there was abuse, physical and emotional abuse towards children. there was a lot of that going on. And one of the things that really was quite sad about this pandemic is that there wasn't enough coverage about mental health. There wasn't enough pushed forward in terms of what can I do if I'm in this situation? Where can I go? I speak to a lot of people, and there's so much lack of awareness for various reasons. Sometimes it's ignorance, sometimes it's just not being knowledgeable of the situation. But there wasn't enough coverage from the media about this, apart from Mental Health Awareness Week or something like that. During this time, there needed to be more said about where people could go if they were experiencing certain issues with their mental health. And that was one of the biggest things I took from this time.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And you have summed up like the experience of what we all lived through over the last 2 years so incredibly. You've just encapsulated that beautifully. So thank you ever so much. I completely, like, it was like I was reliving it then, listening to you talking about it, the highs, the lows. And you were right, we did have amazing weather, but at the same time, there were all of these pressures which were coming at us from different angles. There was this urgency of, oh my goodness, you know, how am I going to cope? How am I going to do this? Because it was such a massive, dramatic change to so many people's lives. I suppose if you've got people who perhaps were living on their own, so they got no kids that that were dependent on them, and they already worked online, maybe for people in that situation, things didn't change instantly too much.
Yes.
But you're right, we all started to wonder about what was going to happen in terms of the bigger picture. And I like the way that you highlight that on a kind of greater level. So the furlough scheme, for example, and then you start thinking about the wider impact on the economy. And then, you know, if you think about, like, that's just how it's happening in your town, your area, your country. And then you kind of magnify that and think, oh my goodness, this is happening right across the world. It's something that we are all going through. And one of the things that really upset me was seeing the different measures in different countries, particularly the ones that were more dictatorial, perhaps, and the way that the governments were enforcing lockdown measures through violence, maybe. And yeah, so I mean, there were some horrendous things happening right across the world. And, you know, it's that awful situation where you think, well, hang on, things are bad for me, and look, they're worse for someone else. And, you know, that's something that can affect you mentally. And I completely agree with you that we heard about the measures to take to protect ourselves physically. Now, whether you agree with that or not, wash your hands constantly and cover yourself from head to foot in antibacterial hand gel. Okay, so that's, but what are we going to do to protect ourselves mentally? And it was a kind of it was a bit of a sink or swim situation. And you're right, a lot of fallout has happened because people didn't cope, and there's been a rise in all sorts of different kinds of abuse, physical, mental, domestic violence. I would say also substance abuse is something which I've personally seen a rise in the people that I know and love, which is, you know, pretty awful. So yeah, I can completely understand what you're saying. What about where we are now? Because I think that the fallout of this, whether you think that the pandemic is over or not, and I know opinion is still divided, but I think that the fallout is going to last long into the future.
Yes, it's a good question. I mean, we can look at some key facts from that period. It's important to look at the facts to kind of know where we are, so we can try and adapt to where we could potentially go. So from 2020, 2021, during that period, an estimated 1 in 6 adults have experienced a common mental disorder like depression or anxiety within the weekly period during 2020-2021, which is the bulk of the pandemic. 2 million adults and 0.8 million children accessed NHS mental health, learning disability and autism services in 2020-21. Waiting times for NHS psychological therapy vary from 4 days to 86 days in different parts of the UK. So if you're living in major cities, you're more likely to be seen quicker, but in other cities, it might not be the same. And if we look at the need for mental health support, it varies for different people, but the access to the services hasn't always been consistent all across the board. And the NHS in England spent 14.3 billion on mental health services in 2020-21, but 14.8% of local NHS funding allocations went to that. So it wasn't directly from the government, it was more from the budget of those local authorities. But one of the most startling statistics was around 1 in 6 children aged 6 to 16 had at least one probable mental health problem in 2021, up from 1 in 9 in 2017. So I said that to say this: where we are right now is we are in uncharted waters, because we've never experienced this before. So like much of what has been going on over the past 2 years, where we're kind of trying to work through this as we go along, is how we're proceeding going forward. And there have been some positive things that have come from this situation, like remote working, being able to communicate with individuals remotely, upskilling. People have been upskilling during this time in lockdown, had plenty of time to learn a new language or learn how to play an instrument or learn how to code during lockdown. So people have managed to find themselves in those areas. But I feel that we are learning about ourselves more as people, as a society. It's been very challenging. Survival became the thing for many. It was more about, right, how do we survive? And some people became selfish during that point. But I think now we're in a new norm. You know, we will never go all the way back to the way it was. We're in the new norm now. And I think going forward, it's more about educating ourselves about each other, about understanding. We have to be a lot more empathetic and show compassion for people's situations. If we look at the care home situation, you know, the elderly have had a really tough time during this period. And we need to be more understanding of that. We can see now the rhetoric from the government is shifting more towards the economy, and we understand that the economy is something that has to be taken into consideration. But I don't think the individual stories of people has been put out there enough. And I think we can do more as people to show more care towards each other going through these tough times, because now mental health is something that needs to be focused upon. We have a generation of children in the world right now who are learning how to adapt to a new world. I've seen it in my children, I've seen it in other people's children, learning about how to deal with the isolation that has happened during this time. You know, some children have found it very difficult to go back to school. You know, some kids were in a situation where they had been at home and their parents were not in a position to provide the same sort of educational support and pastoral support that they would receive in a school setting. So it's more about trying to understand in a more general sense about everybody. And I think that's what we need to do now. That's where we're at now. And whether we choose to do that as a society or not will determine where we go in the future.
I couldn't agree more. And actually, I I can tell that you are a very informed individual, almost as though you're maybe studying this topic at a very deep level.
Yes, I I
Yeah.
did I did sociology at university many years ago,
Yeah.
and I went along my career and I came back to the social sciences via psychology through voluntary work I did for Imagine, a charity in South London. That's when I started to kind of get back into it in trying to understand how the brain works, neuroscience, understanding how individuals react with each other, understanding what cognition is all about, the information we receive in our minds, and how that affects society. And being a social scientist from my university days, it was quite an easy transition into psychology, because social science, sociology is more about society, where psychology is more about the individual. And seeing what was going on, I had that lens externally with everybody. I kind of looked at it as like, why are these things happening? Why are people reacting this way? The cause and effect of things. So it's just something that I've just kind of naturally transitioned into. And I've actually incorporated it into my role at work as well, because there have been individuals that have had challenges for various different reasons, from financial to personal to professional, because this pandemic has affected so many professionally as well. So it's something I really do feel passionate about. So I do take the time to find out as much as I can, so I can help inform others.
Wow. Okay. Well, I've got a question for you, and I didn't tell you that this was coming, but it's something that I've been thinking about during the pandemic and as a part of my own development as well. And tell me if this theory is completely if it's completely not watertight, then that's fine. I'm fine for you to tell me that, because I haven't had the chance to have this discussion with anybody really. So a few months ago, I decided that I was going to try and understand myself. So it was an introspective exercise, particularly after the second lockdown, which you touched on this before. It was horrendous. First lockdown, it was all right. I kind of don't really want to admit that I kind of enjoyed it. I enjoyed the sunshine. I enjoyed the time with my kids. I didn't have a barrow load of pressures. And thankfully, my husband was, kind of keeping the finances together. He was a key worker. And so he was able to, he worked very, very hard, and we kind of became a very tight unit at home. That my sister-in-law was with us, my niece, and there were 6 of us, and we just kind of, we gelled and we hunkered down and we got through it, and it was good. And being that feeling of community and unity, I think, is what helped us through. Second lockdown, absolutely horrendous, bleak, dark, terrible weather, hugely isolating, and just incredibly lonely. And then the Christmas thing happened, and in the UK, a lot of people will have the memory of, oh, you can still have Christmas, oh, you can still have Christmas, no, you can't have Christmas. And I kind of get the feeling that had a really negative effect on a lot of people. So I don't mind admitting, massively depressed, like really bleak. I had a bleak few weeks, and I didn't know where to go. I didn't know who to reach out to, and I really did feel quite hideous. And then I picked myself up, recovered, and I started to do a process of introspection, which involved the Myers-Briggs personality indicators, so the Mbti test. And I'd done it before, like I had trained as a teacher, and I used to teach other teachers, and so we did that as part of the program. And okay, I knew where I was, but I didn't really know what it meant. And I did this again, so almost 20 years later, and I got the same result. But I really started to understand what it meant to be an INFJ. so I don't mind, you know, coming out as an INFJ. And I was like, introvert? Really? Really though? And then I started to learn about the difference between introverts and extroverts. And like, I love people, but actually I really do enjoy being on my own. And I kind of wondered whether you thought that there was a correlation between our personality types and the way that we responded to being isolated. So introverts versus extroverts, for example.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree with that. I feel there is a strong correlation between how we are as individuals in terms of being an introvert and extrovert. I'm quite a social individual, but I'm very comfortable in my own company. And I felt at the time during, especially in particular, the first lockdown, I felt like I was in a position to adapt to the situation. My wife is similar in that sense. But then I started to see people who were deemed extroverts and how they reacted to the pandemic. People who like to go out and socialize, and you know, they take pride in having that space at work where they can, you know, socialize with other people, interactions. They found it really tough. And I think people started to learn a lot about themselves during the first lockdown, and in particularly during the second lockdown, because so like you quite rightly said, Christmas is a time that no matter what during the year, some people might be having a really tough time, but individuals that are fortunate enough to be able to spend it with loved ones, they look forward to Christmas. Yeah. And I felt that was challenging for people who are extroverts, being in a situation where you might be in a position where you might live alone, but you see your family during Christmas, or you might be in a position where you, around the Christmas period, Christmas parties, you know, things like that. It's stuff you like to do, social interaction in terms of gatherings, you know, going to concerts, restaurants, etc. It made people feel alive. It was part of them. And to not have that for such a long period of time really affected people. And I also think it affected introverts as well, because I think what's important to understand is that with introverts and extroverts, the way things were before, you were accustomed to that lifestyle of the way you were able to do things. So some people who are introverts like to be able to go to certain places by themselves, and they were not able to do that. And I think what's happened now is that there are people that have been able to be intuitive enough to be able to say, right, okay, let me try and investigate more about me. How can I work towards this? But there are many who haven't been able to, and they didn't know how to adjust to that. And things like weather is really important for the soul. When you have good weather, or weather that you like, there are people who love the snow and stuff like that, and there's people who love the sun. It really contributes to your mood. And I feel because that was regulated because of the circumstances of the lockdown, that affected people as well. So I totally agree with you. I think there's a correlation between how people feel. I found that I came across more extroverts that were feeling a sense of depression, anxiety, because anxiety is more about being uncertain, worried, concerned about situation, where depression is low mood, loss of interest, being sad. And what you find is that during lockdown, you kind of do everything you could possibly do in the house. And it's like, now what do we do? You know, and I think a lot of people came to that roadblock in terms of trying to find out how they are as individuals. So it was tough. It was tough.
It was tough. Now, I want to pick up on something that I heard you talk about earlier on. You said that you've been working with a charity called Imagine. Is that right?
Yes. I'm not doing work with them anymore because there's something I'm working on myself. But I worked with Imagine in 2017. I loved it. It was fantastic. And we worked with individuals who were finding it difficult with mental health and mental illness. So just to clarify the difference between the two, mental health is like physical health in the fact that we have to take care of it. If we don't, then it will have detrimental effects to ourselves. Now, what people are under the assumption of is, certain people that is that mental health is something that is associated with how people perceive mental health 30, 40, 50 years ago, where as if you were suffering with, you would go to the loony bin, or, you know, you would go to an asylum or something like that. Thankfully, things are starting to change and have been changing for quite some time in terms of how we perceive what mental health is. But I really learned about the difference between the two, because there were service users who would come in there for various different reasons. Some people were working individuals, some people were unemployed, some people were in positions where they were coming from difficult backgrounds. You would have mental health where everybody has mental health situations like anxiety or depression or, you know, phobias, obsessive compulsive disorders. We look at that from a perspective of that cannot be me. But one of the biggest fears for anybody in the world is public speaking. And you have anxiety with that. So people suffer from those sort of things. And then there's mental illness, which is more to do with things which are more further down the line, like reoccurring depression, severe depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, personality disorders, things like that. And I would see these things with people. I started off as a befriender, and then I worked towards becoming a mentor for individuals. So alongside my role at work, I would volunteer for a few hours every week to spend time with these individuals. And I remember one particular person that really changed my life, how I saw mental health. And this individual, when I first met them, they wouldn't come out of their house at all. He was a father, married. His wife was suffering with cancer at the time, and he had 2 children, and he wouldn't leave the house. So our first meeting was the first time he left the house in a very long time. He was extremely nervous, extremely anxious. And my time with him, I spent close to 2 years with this individual. And to see the growth from when I first met them to when our time ended was absolutely amazing. This individual went from a person who didn't want to leave their house to a person who was able to take their daughter to school. Oh. And this was a 47-year-old man who, trying to look after his wife, who they had childhood sweethearts, they'd been together for so long, and you don't know whether your wife is going to be alive or not. And thankfully she is to this day. But seeing him get to a point where there was stages where, okay, let's go to the park. So we would go for a walk to the park, and we would get close to the park and he would say, I can't do this anymore, let's go back. Or let's take the back roads because I don't like being around people. It's like that. To a point where we were able to go in the park and he would just take in the sounds, nature, you know, just be showing gratitude to just those things. And in a world where materialism is such a prominent thing, to see an individual that would just be thankful to spend time outside with nature in peace and quiet, it really, like, you know, it made me think of life in a very different way. So then I started to become more accustomed to my role. And then I said I wanted to develop this further, and I wanted to do more myself personally. So I started to take courses on mentorship and learn more about psychology. And now it's something I'm focusing on in terms of psychotherapy. And I'm really passionate about that. And that individual changed everything for me, because these are the people that sometimes where we're living in London is very fast paced, and sometimes people are just in their own worlds, but these people slip the net. We don't actually know what they're going through. And just spending that time with that individual, he was so appreciative. He was so grateful and thankful for my time. And that, when I first started, I was just like, well, I'm just here to spend time with you and kind of help you to feel more positive. But then it became something that I felt it was like my calling, to help people who are struggling with their mental health.
I was just going to say that this is your calling. You had your calling and you're doing it. And I'm so genuinely delighted to hear that, because it's a very special thing. And, I'm so in awe of what you're doing, the work that you're doing, the way that you've dedicated your life to this. Really, really well done. It's amazing.
I think the important thing as well, there's so many other charities out there that don't really get, spoken of. And I felt the media could have done more to kind of promote that during the pandemic, because people needed this. There are times people are at home not knowing who to turn to, where to go. And just be able to be in a position where, there's this service, there's that service, there's so many services out there that can help people that people are unaware of,
And actually, that's probably a really good place to round up our discussion, because I know that you have already shared some amazing links and resources with me. And so I'm going to make sure that those are down below in the comments and in the description, because you're right. We need to be able to spread the message that there is help out there, and this is where people can go to get it. So I'm really, really grateful. So before we do finish, is there anything else that you would like to share? Anything in terms of a reflection, or any work that you're doing that you would like to big up? And I know there's secret stuff going on, so I'm not trying to get that out of you. But is there anything you want to share before we end?
In reflection, I do believe as a society we can evolve and adapt to a new way of living. As I said before, I don't think things will ever go back all the way back to the way it was. But I do believe we are resourceful as human beings and we are able to adapt. But I feel we need to understand each other more, and we need to support each other more. And I feel now is a time where we can do that and we can push for that. In terms of reflect on the whole experience as a whole, it's been tough. But what has come from that is there have been some really positive things. There have been some times where people have had to kind of have some self-reflection and be in a position where they could reinvent themselves, and that has led to rejuvenation. And I feel going forward now we're at a point where we can really grow as people. Whether that will happen is all dependent on how selfless people become, if they do. And I try and push for trying to inform people and keep people positive. I believe in I'm a person that's on Twitter. That's the main social media I use. And I'm always promoting positivity. I'm always trying to inform people with information to help them. And I feel if you do your part, you can touch somebody like I touched that individual when I first started volunteering. And helping others is an important thing. It really does. You really do get a sense of fulfillment and positivity. And I feel if we all join together to do that, whether it be for your own family members or friends or other people, it doesn't necessarily have to be volunteering. You could start a business, for example, that can help. You could start blogging or vlogging, and someone will hear you. And that could be the difference between someone being able to manage their mental health and someone not. Someone having their mental health strains and struggles and not veering into mental illness or suicide or something like that. Domestic abuse, like, has been something that's been going on throughout the pandemic, and, you know, kind of helping people to understand they're not alone, because it's been a lonely time.
It has.
So
It really.
I hope there's positivity from this.
And I completely support your passion and your purpose and your project, even though I don't know what it is, but I hope that you will one day think about coming back onto the channel to tell us more. And if there is anything that I can do to help you on your journey, then please get in touch, because I'm very grateful for your time. I'm grateful for you sharing this with us. It's just been another mind-blowingly amazing interview, and like, when I say I'm so proud of these interviews, it's not me, it's you guys. Genuinely, thank you so much. I'm really, really grateful.
Yes, no, thank you. And I will, once everything's in place, I will be coming back and to share that with you. And I just wanted to say thank you. Your work is really important, and long may it continue. And shout out to Reshma.
Definitely.
She's a wonderful, wonderful person, amazing person. And she's someone I met through this time as well. And she's been very supportive, and just wanted to shout Reshma out and say, yeah, thank you. So thank you, Eliziam. Really appreciate you having me.
Thank you ever so much. And you're right, massive shout out to Reshma. She has provided you as a guest, and also John Clay, who did an amazing interview that came out yesterday, actually. So yeah, very, very cool indeed. So, as I promised, I will stick those amazing links down below so that you can find out more. And you can find us as well if you want to get in touch with us. That would be wonderful. So there is just enough time for me to thank you for liking, subscribing, and sticking that alert notification on so that you never miss an episode. And don't forget, if you like this channel, don't tell me, tell your friends. I'll see you next time.